12% GST ease the tax burden on the real estate sector. Now, to take us through the same, we have an esteemed panel here with us, whom I'd like to invite right here on stage. Mr. Gaurav Rakyan, Managing Director, Rising Straits Capital. Can we have a round of applause for him, please? Ms. Tina Ravla, Director, Finance, Heinz India. Mr. Deepak Kapoor from Gulshan Homes. The panel discussion will be moderated by Mr. Priyajit Ghosh, Partner Indirect Tax, KPMG in India. May we request our panelists to please join us here on stage. Ladies and gentlemen, just to make a quick mention, Mr. Rajiv Talwar, who was supposed to join us here and was a part of this panel, could unfortunately not make it because we have a last-minute meeting which is happening at the Finance Ministry. So now over to our moderator for the session to kindly take it forward from here.
Well, thank you so much. And what we'll do in the next 20-25 minutes is, GST is a vast topic. And like we have the vast country, we have vast taxes as well. And the typical fact about real estate is it is more complex than any other sector that you can imagine. Because it kind of touches upon each and every segment, possibility, type of business, strata, the kind of people who are involved, all sorts of complexity. If you really look at the taxation that we've come up in the last 70 years, what you'll find is we had a stamp duty which we've continued for, or possibly inherited from British time. Then we had something called service tax coming in. And of course, we had this VAT dispute which was hanging in with courts for quite some time, after which the court said, yes, the VAT applies. So it is kind of a very complex sector, and at some point in time, somebody asked me is, do you think any taxation which doesn't apply to real estate? I kind of thought through and I said luxury tax, because luxury tax doesn't apply to real estate. But I was proved wrong when somebody said that, what about hotels, right? When you construct a hotel, possibly there's a luxury tax there as well. So it kind of touches upon all the taxes. And like for all the other sector, what we realize is it's a very complicated system of taxation. Let GST be rolled out. Now, rollout of GST has got a lot of complications, because whatever that you've done for the last 70 years, if you want to change it overnight, and I'm using the word overnight because it is going to change overnight from tomorrow, there'll be a lot of challenges that's going to come in. Now, while we'll discuss a couple of point of view, perspective or areas, what we need to remember is this is a very new law, and we are still trying to understand the law and kind of trying to implement. All of us will do it for some period of time. So there'll be some bit of a challenge as well as a learning. And the law itself is a very evolving law. But if you really look at the complications, the complication is the central government sitting out of Delhi cannot do anything of its own. Now it has to bring the states on the table and then get an amendment passed. So every time you want to kind of make a big amendment in the law, it cannot be done in the union parliament. It has to go to the state table and then it can get through. So the learning as well as the implementations of learning is going to take a fair bit of an effort from central government as well as state government. The other aspect about the fact is unlearning, right? So I call it unlearning because whatever that we have learned so far, it's very difficult to put in context of GST. And some of the areas that at least I have come across is very counterintuitive. It's very difficult to believe that this is how it is going to happen in GST. So without getting into too much of the technical aspects, what I will do is I'll ask some pointed question, and I'll ask some very often asked question, as I call it. And we have a very distinguished panelist representing the developer as well as the investor community. I don't think we could have any better set of people to express their views. And if anybody in audience wants to express his or her view, we're most welcome to do that. So the first question is about the timing, right? Because it's going to get rolled out from tomorrow. Some people said that it's not a right time to implement. Now, why it's not the right time to implement? Because the quarter has ended. And at the end of the quarter, if you really do something, I mean, it's an additional compliance burden. While some other people said that, no, you shouldn't do it because if you do it from the month of April, then your Constitutional Amendment Act lapses on 15th of September. You really have to go through this political wrangling to get where we are now. So let's roll it out. So there are views around it. And I would want to ask this question to our panelists, is this the right time to implement GST?
So, if you talk about timing, I think, we can look at it in two ways. So I would break timing into two parts. One would be, is this the right thing to do for the industry? And clearly the answer for that is yes. And the second aspect about timing could be, are developers prepared and ready, for this change? In my, limited experience, I mean, unfortunately, the answer for that is probably no. Because obviously, this is a game changer. I mean, it's a big change. There will be a lot of compliance requirements. A lot of hand-holding will be required. There is ambiguity, uncertainty on certain aspect, or a lot of anxiety. Plus, it comes with another very big regulatory change, which is RERA. So, the developers all of a sudden are hit by two very big, regulatory and tax changes. Uh, Add to that, the fact that, financially, a lot of developers are not, in a very healthy shape. So from that standpoint, yeah, one could argue that, it's not the best time, for a developer, who's already struggling with cash flows and sales, to be hit by, a lot of added compliance and regulatory requirements in the form of GST and RERA.
So as per you, you tend to believe that this is not the right time because there are too many moving parts going on at the same time, and possibly a little wait could have been a better thought as compared to what we are today. Stina, what do you think about it? Do you think it's a good time to implement, or do you think one should have waited for a few more months? What could be the right time, or is it the right time to implement?
Priyajit, for a legislation of this magnitude, I believe there's no right or wrong time. It is a legislation whose time has come.
Yes.
Obviously, had it been the beginning of the fiscal year, the logistical challenges would have been fewer. But it is what it is, and I think it is the right time for GST to be implemented.
So you're saying there's no right time, right?
There's
so whether
no
you
right
do it today or whether you do it tomorrow, and somebody told me that, do you remember your exam times? So did you not wish during the last 1 hour of the exams, perhaps I could have 1 more hour and things could have been much better? So perhaps the last rush is something really kind of accelerates everything. What do you think, sir, is about the timing?
Hi. I really endorse the fact that yes, the timings are always right. There is nothing called right time and the wrong time. The legislation has to take place on a day-to-day time.
Right.
Maybe today, tomorrow, or day after. What it depends on whether the industry is in the state of readiness or not.
Right.
And to ensure that the industry is in the state of readiness, a lot of measures the government should have taken before implementing or fixing the date of implementation.
Yeah, so, but then if you really look at it, there are so many changes and complexities to manage. The point over here is that when could we have done this, right? So, because it took quite some time for all the states to get ready about it. And while we are trying to implement, somebody said that if you really look at how it is evolving, a lot of things are getting postponed, right? So without getting into specifics of what is getting postponed, because whatever that is getting postponed, I think it's not a bad news. But still, there is some bit of a preparedness which is required even from the government side. And I guess as we go forward, things are going to be better. There will be a learning, and I guess the ministry has already said that they're going to be taking a lenient view for the first couple of months. And if you really look at what they've done in the last 10 days, they have said that one would not have to file the detailed return, and you have to only file a summary return. So I guess what will happen over a period of time is maybe in another 6 to 8 months, we'll forget this, the timing discussion at least, and remember about the date. The other question is about the anticipation which people have about what is going to be the impact on the economy. The macroeconomic impact on the economy, which means what is going to be the big picture. Is India going to be competitive? Is India going to head for a chaos? Or are we going to slip into some of the other countries have slipped into after GST is introduced? Not specifically because of GST, but a little bit of a correlation when people do to say that here is when the GST is implemented, here is how the other factors are faring. May not have a direct correlation, but you still have some data points available. So what do you think would be the long-term impact and a short-term impact of GST on Indian economy?
See, I think it's difficult to argue that something like GST will not have a favorable long-term impact.
Absolutely.
Okay, and you can look at precedents. All other countries. I mean, If you look at other Southeast Asian economies, whether it's Singapore, Indonesia, Thailand, all have implemented GST, and that has had a positive long-term impact. Now, whether that will translate into an incremental 2% of GDP or 3% GDP, I think that's difficult to say. So I think from a long-term perspective, GST is beneficial. There's no doubt about it. And that is what is the global precedence as well.
Yes.
Short term, yes, there could be teething issues. There could be inflationary pressures. All of that cannot be ruled out. All of those things have also happened in countries where GST was implemented.
Yes.
So what will happen in the next 12 months or 15 months is difficult to predict. There could be certain, adverse impacts or inflationary impacts. Long term, I think it's difficult to argue that it's not beneficial.
Right. Rina, what's your view of this?
Completely agree with Gaurav on this one.
Yes.
It is bound to have a positive impact on the economy over the longer term. There will be teething problems for the next 12 to 18 months. People
Yes.
will find it difficult to adhere to the compliances. I understand these are more than what were there earlier, but overall, I think it is bound to have a positive impact.
Yeah.
I also have the same thoughts, primarily because it's been well in the government circles that they wanted to implement GST for quite some time, and they were not able to just because of the politics of the side of it. So today the scenario has come where the GST is a reality. So let us accept it, enjoy it, understand it, and try if we can implement it in the right perspective. Eventually we will come out victoriously, because we have seen Indian breed is the toughest breed, whether the Indian businessman is there or the Indian organization. We had tied over so many issues, if and buts, and for the last 60 years, so much of complexities of taxation, and still the Indian businessman is rising through and through. So I believe there is absolutely no problem. Only thing is that initially, of course, the teething problems are there. Why? Because the clarity of communication is not there. Every second day we're getting a new circular which is adding to more confusion in it. And once that circular stops being issued and we have a system in place, I think things will move in the right direction.
Yeah, so that reminds me of a story that somebody came crying saying that I don't understand GST, what is going to be all about. Some of the ads that we see in the television where this person is cooking and the GST comes out of the plate and all of it. So this person was confused about GST, and then the other person says that, I have a class of GST going on. Would you want to join? He says, yes, I want to join, and he goes there. And then he realizes the class is almost over. And he says that, look, I'll prove the fact that how effective the class was. And he asked the question to one of the students as a part of assessment that in a tree, you go and pluck 5 mangoes, and then you again go to the same tree and you pluck 4 guavas. How many fruits are there? So this person who the question was directed to, he says there are about 8 mangoes. Yeah. And so he gets confused and he says that, did you get the answer? He says, yes, I got the answer. And as per me, there should be 9 elephants. Right? So I think there'll be a confusion to begin with, and nobody knows the right answer, as we call it, because the law, when they drafted it, possibly they'll not be able to take care of all the situations that we deal with. And this is where a proactive clarification is something which is going to be helpful. If you really look at what the government is doing it, which is never done, that there's a Twitter handle of CBEC, and if you post a question, you will get a reply. It takes some time, but you will definitely get a reply. Those are point of view though. But this is a new means of outreach which the government has tried, at least in the tax space. The second part which the government is doing really well is to make sure that it is reaching out to the industry segment. So they've created those groups. The groups are not very exhaustive though, but I guess this is a consultative process which is going to continue beyond 6 months. And I really hope that, that we also have somebody who would be able to kind of voice the concern, take it to the policymakers, and understand the ground reality and the practical challenges. Because while we have done the law, unfortunately or fortunately, the law doesn't answer all the questions that we have today. And that is where the law is going to evolve. So in a short run, there'll be some bit of a chaos. And I guess the price of chaos is going to be far lesser than the benefit that we are going to get in long run. And I guess what Gaurav rightly has explained, that the definition of long run and short run is going to be about 12 to 15 months, right? So the other thing that I want to point out over here is I keep going through those data points where somebody has done a correlation of a country X where GST was implemented, and let's suppose inflation. right? But those data points, if you really look at it, needs to be put it in the perspective the economy is at that point in time. So like, for example, in certain countries, there was a big national game or an international game that got organized, which kind of took some bit of a consumption level up. So you really can't compare. In some of the other countries, the oil prices took a hit, right? The exchange mechanism went in for a toss. So I guess in all the days to come, I mean, whatever data point that we are going to see in the context of GST, that needs to be supplemented with all the other independent factors or dependent factors impacting that particular variable. The next question is a pretty much open question to say that two areas that are done well, and two areas all of us hope that could have been done better. What are the two areas, Gaurav, do you think that has been done well, and two areas that could have been done better?
Well, I think it's probably, easy to give a theoretical answer, that, they could have probably tried to come up with a single tax rate
Yes.
or stuff like that. I mean, in a complex country like ours, and given what the complex indirect system that was already prevailing, I think, the government has come up with a pretty, decent outcome. So honestly, I have very little, that yeah, as I said, theoretically, you can argue that the government could have done, many more things, given where we were, given the complexities involved, I think, they've done a good job.
So you're saying that in retrospect, things can be done much better, but when you are in the present, then possibly, if you look at it, possibly whatever they have achieved in the last 1 year from where we are is quite phenomenal, yeah? And Tina, what do you think, two areas or maybe one area which was done well, and what do you think could have been done differently or better?
I think it has sent a very strong positive message about ease of doing business.
Ease of doing business, yes.
Whether or not it will actually influence investment decisions as far as foreign investors are concerned is something that remains to be seen and will evolve over a period of time. But the message is very strong and positive. Secondly, from a more transactional viewpoint, I think the input credit that has been allowed is a welcome change, because earlier it was adding to the cost of construction.
Yes.
Now it is an offset, and it is likely to bring the cost of construction down. An area I personally believe could have been done well is that there's a lot of concern I have around the whole self-invoicing issues.
The compliances.
Compliances
Yes.
in dealing with unregistered vendors, and I
Yes.
think there's a lot of clarity that is required there. It is a concern, could have been done better.
Right. What do you think could have been?
Absolutely, the answer remains the same. The very positive point is the thought process, so that multiple taxation is taken care of in one concept called GST. So that is a welcoming gesture. And the implementation part of it, what is needs to be seen is this multiplicity of the rates, commodities, items. Why? Because that is creating a more confusion. Here, the structured item definition is not clear in the mind of the population.
Right, right.
So
Absolutely.
the glass may be known by some another name also. So what vendor will put glass or what name, and when I'll invoice it, what will I put in? How do we reconcile it? So there are a lot of so much of confusion area as far as the implementation part is concerned. So that is a concern, but over the period when we start to be into it, we have to start from first. So slowly and steadily, eventually it will happen. How it could have been done better, I believe that usually the legislation of this magnitude, which affects the whole country as a nation, then the government should have given a test marketing kind of subject. They should have taken one model UT or a state where they should have test marketed it for a period of 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, seen the results, seen the good and bad side of it, and then come out with implementing slowly and steadily and pass it on to the whole of nation. Probably the difficulty is getting it passed through the parliament and implementing the way the private businessman thinks may not be a possibility in the government circles. So probably that must be the limitation factor. But I feel if we do that, the concept is absolutely clear and positive, but a lot needs to be done on the practical side of it.
And that's a very interesting point that you said about the test concept. And that is something that I was looking out when I look at the compliance part of it. And we have a lot of practical question when you design the IT system to say that, will it accept so many fields? Will it accept so much of data? And unfortunately, once you're out of the drawing board, you've kind of implemented it. it's so much of difficult area to kind of change it and do it all over again. So possibly a test environment, even for an IT, could have been a better from my wish list. Yes?
For anything, you know, what we
Yes.
do in life, we always test do.
Absolutely.
You go to a doctor, he has to give you an injection. He says, let me test whether it is going to react positively or negatively on you.
Yeah.
Once he's satisfied, then he gives you a full dose.
Yeah.
So we take cues from the natural surrounding and understand the legislation of this magnitude needs to be tested in 1 or 2 UTs or a state before implementing it all over India. This is my take personally.
And I think one of the biggest area where I kind of keep, I'm very proud about it and keep sharing the data about is that we are not one government or one political party ruling all over India. So there are 30 states and we are confederation of states, and getting all the 30 states agree on it, and there may be 1 or 2 states who may disagree on it, but 28, 27 states agree on it, and you are able to push through the council the decisions without mandatorily going through a voting route is a big achievement. Now, whether you want to call it a political achievement or you want to call it a strategic achievement, but it's an achievement. And that in itself puts a confidence, at least to begin with, that uniformity of law all over India in terms of the rate, in terms of the provisions, in terms of the complexities, is going to be something which is will far more effective than what we are. So what we are saying is that tomorrow, if there is an issue, under the law, entire India faces that issue, and seeking a problem is so much of a easy area rather than you have something in a VAT. So in VAT, you apply one concepts in a particular state, you want to borrow and use it in some other states, you get into those verbiage, as we call it, or reading between lines and lines, and trying to figure out an answer. So with this union concept and now being taken to at a federal level, that is a big, big differentiator as compared to what we are today. The next one is pretty popular. Do you think that the entire ecosystem, which comprises of contractors, which comprises of the developers, which comprises of the brokers, are they ready for the rollout? And if you were to give one suggestion, or if you were to be in their situation, what is it that one thing what would you do apart from understanding the law? Because I think all of us will get wise with the time. But what do you think are they ready, and one thing that you would suggest them to do?
Honestly, my simple suggestion to them would be hire KPMG. Well,
Okay.
the honest answer is, when something as complex as GST is rolled out, it's very difficult to be, one can try to learn it, but there's a
Yes.
lot of hand-holding that's required.
Yes.
So, even though I said it in a light way, you do need consultants, to handhold you, during the initial process. And especially here where, it's not only GST, developers are still grappling with how to get, the RERA registration and everything done. So yes, I mean, you do need to hire, the experts to handhold you through the process.
So hiring the expert is right, and I think if you have to broad base is understanding the law, and I guess exchange of views and perspective, as I call it, exchange of views and perspective from people who have dealt with those issues, and then taking to a policy maker and suggesting them and taking them to a suggestion is something which I think is going to kind of make a lot of difference, because everybody is open to suggestions today and everybody is open to perspective. What we cannot do is make one law and say that this is going to be a solution for fit for all, right? Tina, what do you think? I mean, all of us ready, and do you think, what is your suggestion about it?
I believe the intent and the effort to make it a success is there. Whether or not we are fully geared to comply with this will emerge only when the first round of filings are done.
Right. So I think you'll wait and watch before you kind of pass
Wait
your
and
verdict,
watch.
right? Yes, yes. Yeah, right.
Well, my take is same that yes, we have to implement it. There is no other thought process. But besides implementing the law within your own organization or the industry, we all have to become friend, philosopher, and a guide. Learn and let others learn the complexity of the new law, understand it, make it simple, and implement it. There is no other way.
And I'm sharing my personal experience, and as many times, I mean, I've been to high-level committee, I've been to Ministry of Finance, and if you take it to them a concept, they are more than happy to understand and learn that concept. So I guess the efficacy of the entire system would also lie in convincing them and taking our problem to them. Because if you really look at the May law, the law that came out about 1 year back, it had a lot of holes and gaps. And if you look at the November law, it was completely filled up, which means whatever suggestions that were made, all of those are addressed in the final version of the law. However, having said that, there will be certain areas in which the law is not completely geared to address, and the Twitter handle is a very good initiative. One should be asking questions, one should be making a suggestion, and that is how possibly a better law will emerge over a period of time. The next one is a very pointed question, and it's a yes or no answer, is do you think 12% rate is likely to be neutral for the sector, or it appears that possibly any other rate could have been a better fit?
So my view is I think 12% is a very, very fair rate for the sector. And we can all do the math. I mean, it's easy to do the math, because today, in the pre-GST scenario, you were paying, a service tax of 4.5%, a VAT of about 1%. So there was about 5.5% that you were paying, and you were actually not getting any credit for it.
On the goods, yes.
Yeah. Now, on the other side, now you are paying 12%. Okay, so let's say on 100 rupees, you are paying 12 rupees. Now you look at your raw materials, cost of construction. Most of those goods, are attracting a GST rate of anywhere between 18% to 28%.
Correct.
Right. So let's just take on an average 24%. So which basically means that if you are paying 12 rupees on 100 rupees, okay, for you to offset that fully, if you can get 50 rupees, so or 50% of your revenue. Okay, so if 50% of your revenue, so if 50 rupees is your cost and you are paying you're paying 24% of that, then you can offset your GST fully.
Right.
Now, if you just apply this to if you just kind of take this to selling prices, the way I look at it is, if you're talking about a selling price of, let's say, 6,000 rupees per square foot, which, you can safely apply to most of India,
Yes.
barring Mumbai,
Yes.
and you take 50% of that, right, which is 3,000 rupees, which, which again, is a good estimate to have for construction cost.
Right.
Okay, so if you apply that rule of thumb, okay, then most of the projects, should easily be able to get the tax credit, for the entire GST that they're paying. So, from that perspective, I think it's a neutral rate. So versus 5.5% that you're paying today, there is a good chance that you'll be able to get tax credit, for your entire cost of construction.
And this question gets asked is why not 7%, 8%? And we just spoke about the multiplicity of the rate. When we put multiple rate, the classification itself becomes a challenge, right? So you'll have overlapping items where you define one product and then there are sub-products, sub-categories, and it's a nightmare. But if you put a flat one rate, then everybody gets bucketed into the same rate, which may not be a fair bit of a taxation, because in India we have this varying level of affordability. So if you tax everything at 12% or maybe about 10% or 5%, the taxation becomes very simple, but everybody gets to pay the same rate of tax or same amount of tax irrespective of his basket of consumption. Now look at 5% and look at 12%, right? These are the only two rates that we've had to kind of get bracketed to. If you create an abatement and make another 7% rate, then we are back to something like old regime. So between 5 and 12, the views appears to be that 12 is much better. Of course, 18 is nobody wanted 18, right, Tina? So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I believe the rate is fair. From the math that we've done, we believe the margins will slightly improve even after a 12% tax, so it's fair.
Yeah, I saw you smiling. I think, yeah, you have a perspective. Yeah.
Well, I'm a developer. So from the developer perspective, I'll say the calculation given by you does not hold good in any of the situation. Why? Because there is a lot of complexity in terms of calculation. So that complexity in terms of calculation has not been made absolutely clear as on date. So it all depends on the readiness of the project stage.
So you'd like to put a qualifier saying that perhaps all of this cannot be straight-jacketed and may not be generalized, right?
Absolutely. I have this fair feeling. Why? Because a lot of deliberations are being going on inside developer community, and we find that It is very difficult to say whether 12% is the right rate or not the right rate. Primarily from the viewpoint of the customer, if you see that he's been paying on a price bracket of 100 rupees. Earlier, his invoice was 104.5 rupees because 4.5 was the VAT component on it. Today, the government says you have to say 12%. So if from 1st July I have to invoice to a customer for a real estate product, I have to say 100 rupees plus 12%, which is 112 rupees. Because then government notification comes which says the developers are not supposed to charge from the customer. So that puts me in a dilemma whether should I charge from 1st July or I should not charge from 1st July. If the customer is sitting in my office, I have a confusion. What should I charge him? Now, regarding getting the input credit, that I will eventually come to know after a period of 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. Now, I'm in a dilemma today. If I have to sell my real estate, should I tell my customer that I am selling you my real estate product, but actual price I'll tell you after 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. Let me find out what is my input credit, and then I'll see what best input credit I can pass on to you, and that will be the price final. I think no product sells like this in this market. So this is my dilemma, that there are a lot of talk about GST, but the confusion is there that on 1st of July, if customer is sitting in my office, what price should I quote him? And with what taxation?
So I guess what we mentioned in the last conversation is, guess about that when you are moving from one set of taxation present in 70 years to something which is going to come, let's suppose day after tomorrow, there'll be a certain set of uncertainty which is going to prevail. I guess all of us will forget the topic as well as the discussion in another 2 years from where we are today. So I guess the unanimous view appears to be that if the economy were to go the way it is supposed to go, and all the benefits that we have spoken about, we give a fair amount of settling down time. Fair amount of settling down time to my mind would be about 12 months to 15 months. I guess in a long term, things are going to be much more competitive than what we are today. And one of the biggest reason that I say so is because if you look at the developer, if you have a ready-mix concrete plant, the excise authorities have a jurisdiction over you. The VAT, of course, has for the last couple of 5 years almost. The service tax authorities had it since a long time.
Everyone.
Yes, everyone has a jurisdiction, right? So complexity is going to come down and the transparency is also going to improve. But we'll have to give some bit of a settling time to the new regime because you just can't do it. So I guess those questions are very fair. And this is where we think that perhaps some bit of a thought process, some bit of a learning, some bit of an unlearning as well is going to kind of take us through and land us where we want it to be. The last question is, of course, as a run-up to GST, what is the impact that you see on sales in the next 6 months and beyond 6 months? And do you think can you come up with any idea to address if you see any concerns around sales?
That's what we are looking at day and night. So initial impact, confusion, so low sales. Initial impact, confusion, so low sales. But over the period of time, as and when the clarity is there and the implementation process becomes smooth, I think eventually everybody will settle down and then we'll have the velocity.
So it's more of a transition part, and I guess one of the important steps that can be taken, and we often say that government should do this, or possibly as an industry body one should do this. It's an ecosystem as I look at it, right? So all the people who've kind of transitioned or maybe transitioning well as compared to others have they helped each other to come to this stage, right? So I am a developer. Perhaps if there are smaller players, if I am able to empower with the same set of knowledge and clarity that I have, the entire ecosystem benefits, right? Because the law is same, but interpreting the law or maybe getting a clarity around the law, the whole industry has to come together before it can be a reality. Tina, what is your take on sales?
We'll see a dip in sales initially.
Yes.
These will eventually stabilize and pick up, I hope.
And I guess if you go by what your math says, yeah, it's going to improve, right?
Yeah,
it's going to be improved and it's
required.
Yes, Gaurav, what's your view?
So I think, as, he rightly pointed out, it all depends on, because there is ambiguity and confusion regarding how much of the GST should you pass on to the customer.
Yes.
Okay. There will be, there will be an adverse effect. Now, for certain kind of projects, there definitely has to be an adverse effect. So for a project where, let's say, bulk of the construction has got done, but the occupation certificate has not been received. Okay, so there is no scope of getting input credit. Okay, so anything that you sell, you have to charge 12% on that. Okay, so clearly there will be an adverse impact there because the customer would rather wait for another 6 months and get a completed product, okay, on which GST is not applicable. Other cases, some projects, especially Bombay, where, land is a huge part of your project cost. Okay, so there you can clearly not, you won't be able to get a full set off because you're not getting any set off on the cost of land. So there again, the developer will be forced to pass on, a significant burden of the GST to the consumer. Okay, but in other cases where there is ambiguity, like he said, today the developer does not know how much of GST to charge to the customer, if
the prices,
prices, yes. So, yes. In case the developer takes an aggressive view and he does not pass on anything, yes, sales should not be affected. But yeah, in most cases, you are likely to see an adverse impact on sales.
So I think the message is very clear that in the transition, there will be some bit of a challenge which you're likely to face. And this is the challenge which everybody faced. So when Malaysia implemented, I saw a challenge because they did not understand anything called credit, because that was a single point taxation, right? So there'll be some bit of a challenge, but I guess the direction and the course that we have set up is something which is going to take us to where we always wanted it to be. So this is all from our side, and there'll be some bit of a learning and there'll be some bit of an unlearning. With this, we conclude the panel, and we can interact maybe after the session is over. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.